"That's not my mommy," 5-year-old Emma screamed as the HOA president dragged her from school with fake adoption papers. But Margaret Karen Williams had planned this kidnapping for months, watching the perfect family she despised. Today her obsession would destroy everything, including her own life. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Sunshine Elementary School. Children laughed in the playground, teachers prepared their lessons, and parents dropped off their little ones with quick hugs and promises to pick them up later. But for the Thompson family, this Tuesday would become the worst day of their lives. Margaret Karen Williams had been the HOA president of Maple Grove community for 3 years. She ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, measuring grass lengths with a ruler, fining families for minor violations, and making everyone's life miserable. Her own family had grown tired of her controlling behavior, but nobody knew how far she would go to get what she wanted. Karen had been watching the Thompson family for months. She hated everything about them, their cheerful attitude, their beautiful garden that somehow always looked better than hers, and most of all, their perfect little daughter Emma. Every morning, Karen would peek through her blinds and watch David and Sarah Thompson walking hand in hand with 5-year-old Emma to the school bus stop. The sight made her blood boil with jealousy. Why do they get to be so happy? Karen muttered to herself each morning, her coffee growing cold as she spied on her neighbors. Their grass is half an inch too long, their fence needs repainting, and they park their car 2 inches into the street. They don't deserve that beautiful child. The Thompsons had tried to be friendly when they first moved to Maple Grove 2 years ago. Sarah had even baked cookies and knocked on Karen's door to introduce themselves. But Karen had immediately started listing HOA violations and handed them a 20-page rule book instead of accepting the cookies. Since then, the relationship had only gotten worse. At 2:30 p.m., Karen marched into Sunshine Elementary with a folder full of fake documents. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer purse clutched tightly, and her face wore that familiar expression of someone who always got her way. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying adoption procedures online and practicing her story in the mirror. "I'm here to pick up Emma Thompson," she announced to the school secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, with fake confidence masking her racing heart. "I'm sorry, but you're not on our pickup list for Emma," Mrs. Rodriguez replied politely, checking her computer screen twice to make sure. Karen's eyes flashed with anger. She slammed the folder on the counter so hard that the secretary's coffee mug rattled. "I have legal adoption papers right here. That child is mine now. The Thompsons signed over their rights last week because they can't afford to take care of her anymore." The secretary's heart raced. Something felt terribly wrong, but the papers looked official. Karen had spent weeks forging them, using her position as HOA president to access neighborhood information and create convincing documents. She had even stolen official letterhead from the county courthouse during a HOA legal meeting. "Ma'am, this is very unusual. I need to call the principal immediately," Mrs. Rodriguez said nervously, her hands shaking as she reached for the phone. "Call whoever you want," Karen snapped, her voice getting louder and more aggressive. "But I'm taking my daughter home right now. I've already wasted enough time on your incompetence." Other parents in the waiting area began to stare. Karen's shouting was making everyone uncomfortable, but she didn't care. She had come too far to turn back now. "I need to call the principal," Mrs. Rodriguez said nervously. "Call whoever you want," Karen snapped. "But I'm taking my daughter home right now." Principal Johnson arrived within minutes, his face showing deep concern. He had been an educator for 20 years and had never encountered a situation like this. Karen repeated her story, showing the fake adoption papers and acting increasingly frustrated that anyone would question her authority. "These documents need to be verified through proper channels," Principal Johnson said carefully, studying the papers. "We have strict protocols for situations like this." "Protocols?" Karen's voice rose to a near shout. "I'm a respected member of this community. I'm the HOA president. How dare you question my integrity? These papers were signed by a judge last Friday. The Thompsons are drug addicts who couldn't take care of Emma anymore. I'm saving her from a terrible situation." The lies flowed easily from Karen's mouth. She had rehearsed this story so many times that she almost believed it herself. In her twisted mind, she had convinced herself that the Thompsons were unfit parents who didn't deserve Emma. "We'll need to contact the parents to verify this," Principal Johnson said firmly, though his hands were shaking slightly. "Go ahead and try," Karen smiled coldly, checking her expensive watch. "They won't answer. They're too ashamed of giving up their daughter. They probably already left town by now." What Karen didn't know was that David and Sarah Thompson were both in court that day, fighting a malicious lawsuit that Karen herself had filed against them for property violations. The lawsuit was completely frivolous. Karen had claimed their garden shed was 6 inches too close to the property line and demanded $50,000 in damages. Their phones were turned off during the hearing as required by court rules. The irony was cruel. While Karen was kidnapping their daughter, the Thompsons were in court defending themselves against Karen's harassment. They had no idea their worst nightmare was coming true just miles away. After an hour of desperate phone calls with no response, and under Karen's constant pressure and threats to call her lawyer and sue the school, the staff made the biggest mistake in the school's history. They made the decision that would haunt them forever. They released 5-year-old Emma to Karen. Emma immediately sensed something was wrong. When she saw Karen waiting for her instead of her parents, her little face crumpled with fear and confusion. "Where's my mommy and daddy?" Emma asked, her voice small and scared. "They had to go away for a while, sweetie," Karen said in a fake sweet voice that made the teacher's skin crawl. "I'm going to take care of you now." "No!" Emma screamed, backing away from Karen. "That's not my mommy. I want my real mommy. Someone help me." The 5-year-old's terror was heartbreaking, but Karen grabbed her arm firmly. "She's just confused and traumatized from the transition," Karen explained to the horrified staff. "The social worker warned me this might happen. She'll calm down once we get home." Emma fought and cried as Karen dragged her toward the exit, but the school staff felt helpless. The papers looked official and Karen's story seemed plausible. They had no choice but to let her leave with the screaming child. Karen drove Emma to her house, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had actually done it. She had taken the perfect child away from the people she hated most. Emma sobbed in the back seat, begging to go home, but Karen ignored her cries. "Stop crying," Karen snapped as she pulled into her driveway. "You're going to like living with me. I have rules and structure, unlike your lazy parents." Karen's house was the opposite of the warm, loving Thompson home. Everything was white and sterile, with no toys, no color, and no signs that a child had ever been welcome there. Karen led Emma to the guest bedroom and locked the door from the outside. "You'll stay here until you learn to behave," Karen said through the door. "No crying, no screaming, and no asking for your parents. They don't want you anymore." Emma pounded on the door with her tiny fists, screaming for her mommy and daddy until her voice became hoarse. Karen sat in her living room trying to convince herself that she had done the right thing. In her delusional mind, she was saving Emma from neglectful parents and giving her the proper upbringing she deserved. At 4 p.m., David and Sarah Thompson arrived at the school to pick up Emma, laughing about something that had happened in court. Their laughter died instantly when they saw the principal's grave expression waiting for them in the office. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, please sit down," Principal Johnson said, his voice heavy with dread. "Where's Emma?" Sarah asked immediately, a mother's instinct telling her something was terribly wrong. "I'm afraid there's been a situation," the principal began, but David interrupted. "Where is our daughter?" David's voice was sharp with panic. "A woman came here today with adoption papers claiming Emma had been placed in her care. We tried calling you multiple times, but—" "What do you mean adoption papers?" Sarah screamed, jumping to her feet. "There are no adoption papers. She's our daughter. What do you mean someone else took her?" The principal explained about Karen's visit and the official-looking documents, but David's face turned white with rage. His hands clenched into fists as the horrible reality sank in. "Margaret Williams," he said through gritted teeth. "That psychotic HOA president kidnapped our daughter." Sarah collapsed into David's arms, her legs giving out from the shock. Oh my God, where is she? Where is my baby?" The principal immediately called 911 while Sarah sobbed uncontrollably. David held his wife, his own tears falling as he tried to stay strong for both of them. Their worst nightmare had come true, and it was all because of one woman's twisted obsession with control. Within minutes, police sirens filled the school parking lot. Detective Martinez arrived with a team of officers, treating this as the serious kidnapping case it was. The school went into lockdown as police interviewed staff and reviewed security footage. "We have video of the woman taking Emma," Officer Chen reported to Detective Martinez. "The child was clearly distressed and trying to get away from her." Detective Martinez took detailed statements from David and Sarah while officers immediately put out an Amber Alert. Emma's photo appeared on every phone, radio, and television screen within 50 miles. The entire community was notified that Emma Thompson had been kidnapped by a woman driving a white Mercedes SUV. Sarah couldn't stop shaking as she described Emma's favorite clothes, her stuffed rabbit, and how scared she must be. "She's never been away from us except for school," Sarah sobbed. "She doesn't understand what's happening. She must be so frightened." David provided Karen's full name and address, explaining their history of HOA disputes. "She's been harassing us for 2 years," he told Detective Martinez. "Fake fines, frivolous lawsuits, constantly watching our house. She's obsessed with controlling everyone in the neighborhood." The police traced Karen's address through the fake documents she had left behind and the school's security footage that clearly showed her license plate. When they arrived at her house 20 minutes later, they could hear Emma's cries from inside. "Mrs. Williams, open the door. This is the police," Detective Martinez shouted, pounding on Karen's front door. Karen's blood ran cold when she heard the sirens and saw the flashing lights through her window. She had convinced herself that her plan was foolproof, but reality was crashing down around her. "Just a minute," Karen called out, frantically trying to think of a way out of this situation. She looked at the locked bedroom door where Emma's cries had finally quieted to exhausted whimpers. When Karen opened the front door, she was immediately surrounded by police officers. Her hands were shaking, but she tried to maintain her composure. "Mrs. Williams, you're under arrest for kidnapping," Detective Martinez announced, pulling out his handcuffs. "This is ridiculous," Karen shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "She's my adopted daughter. I have papers. I saved her from neglectful parents." "Ma'am, those papers are forgeries and we have video evidence of you taking a child against her will. Where is Emma Thompson?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen lied, but the sound of Emma crying from the bedroom betrayed her. Officers quickly found Emma locked in the guest room. The little girl was curled up in a corner, clutching her school backpack and sobbing. When she saw the police officers, she ran to them with relief. "Please take me home to my mommy and daddy," Emma cried, throwing her arms around Officer Chen's legs. "The mean lady locked me in here and wouldn't let me go." As the handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, neighbors began gathering outside. Word spread quickly through the community that their tyrannical HOA president had kidnapped a child. People who had suffered under Karen's harassment for years watched with satisfaction as she was led to the police car. "What's going on?" Robert asked, confused and embarrassed. Detective Martinez explained the situation while Karen was placed in the police car. Robert's face went through every emotion: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally deep shame. "I can't believe she did this," Robert whispered, watching his wife being driven away. "I knew she was controlling, but kidnapping a child." At the police station, Karen's world began crashing down around her. The fake adoption papers were easily proven fraudulent. Emma's parents arrived and were reunited with their terrified daughter, who ran into their arms crying, "Mommy, Daddy, the mean lady took me and wouldn't let me go home." Emma sobbed. Sarah held her daughter tight while David gave his statement to police. Their relief was overwhelming, but the trauma of those hours would stay with their family forever. Karen sat in the interrogation room, still believing she had done nothing wrong. "I was protecting that child from negligent parents," she insisted. "They violated HOA rules 17 times this year." "Ma'am, HOA violations don't give you the right to kidnap someone's child," Detective Martinez explained. "You're facing serious charges: kidnapping, forgery, false imprisonment, and child endangerment." That's when the interrogation room door opened and Robert walked in. But he wasn't there to support his wife. "Karen Williams," he said formally, pulling out an envelope. "You are hereby served with divorce papers." Karen's face went white. "Robert, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago," Robert replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've watched you become a monster. You've terrorized our neighbors, destroyed friendships, and now you've kidnapped a child. I can't be married to someone like you. You can't divorce me. I'm your wife." "Not anymore," Robert said sadly. "I've also contacted a lawyer about changing my name back to my maiden name. I don't want to share your name after what you've done." Karen's carefully controlled world was falling apart. The woman who had spent years controlling everyone around her had finally lost control of everything that mattered. News of the kidnapping spread through social media within hours. Videos of Karen being arrested went viral, with neighbors sharing stories of her years of harassment and control. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president and ban her from all community activities. At the courthouse the next day, Karen faced Judge Wilson for her bail hearing. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, parents from Emma's school, and reporters. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, The defendant used her position in the community to forge documents and kidnap a 5-year-old child. She shows no remorse and continues to claim she was justified in her actions. Judge Wilson looked down at Karen with disgust. Mrs. Williams, in 30 years on this bench, I've rarely seen such a calculated and cruel crime. You terrorized a child and her family for your own twisted reasons. Bail is denied. Karen's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge's decision was final. Karen would stay in jail until her trial. Over the following weeks, more stories emerged about Karen's abuse of power. Neighbors came forward with evidence of her harassment, illegal fines, and attempts to control their lives. The HOA dissolved entirely, with residents voting to govern themselves without a controlling authority. Robert filed for emergency divorce, citing Karen's criminal behavior and mental instability. He got custody of their house and all assets, while Karen got nothing but a prison sentence. 3 months later, Karen stood before Judge Wilson again for sentencing. The courtroom was even more packed than before. David and Sarah Thompson sat in the front row with Emma, who had been through months of therapy to overcome her trauma. Mrs. Williams, Judge Wilson began, your actions have caused immeasurable harm to this child and her family. You've shown no remorse, no understanding of the severity of your crimes, and no respect for the law. Karen's lawyer had advised her to show remorse, but her pride wouldn't let her. She stood straight, believing she had been wronged by everyone. I sentence you to 15 years in state prison for kidnapping, 3 years for forgery, 2 years for false imprisonment, and 1 year for child endangerment. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. You will serve a total of 21 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in applause. Karen's face finally showed real emotion, pure terror at the thought of spending the next 21 years behind bars. As she was led away in shackles, Karen saw Robert in the hallway. He was holding hands with Linda, a kind neighbor that Karen had harassed for years about her garden. Robert, Karen called out desperately. Please don't abandon me. Robert looked at her with sadness but no sympathy. You abandoned yourself the day you decided to hurt an innocent child. Goodbye, Karen. Emma Thompson, now safe in her parents' arms, watched the woman who had terrified her being taken away. She didn't understand everything that had happened, but she knew the scary lady couldn't hurt her anymore. The Maple Grove community began healing. Without Karen's constant harassment, neighbors became friends again. Children played freely in their yards without fear of HOA violations. Block parties returned, and the community spirit that Karen had destroyed slowly came back to life. Robert married Linda 2 years later in the same community center where Karen used to hold her HOA meetings. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's knock on their door now gathered to celebrate love and friendship. In prison, Karen struggled with the reality of her situation. Her cellmates didn't respect child kidnappers, and she found herself at the bottom of the prison hierarchy, a far cry from her days as HOA president. She wrote letters to Robert begging for forgiveness, but he never responded. She tried to contact her former neighbors, but they had all moved on with their lives. The woman who had once controlled an entire community now couldn't even control her own daily routine. Years passed, and Emma Thompson grew up into a confident, happy teenager. Her parents had made sure she got the help she needed to overcome her trauma, and while she remembered that scary day, it no longer controlled her life. On her 16th birthday, Emma wrote a letter to the judge who had sentenced Karen. Thank you for keeping the mean lady away from other children. You helped my family feel safe again. Judge Wilson kept that letter in his desk as a reminder that justice, when served properly, can heal even the deepest wounds. Karen Williams, the woman who had once believed she controlled everything, learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power comes from kindness, not control, and that actions have consequences that can last a lifetime. The community that had once lived in fear of their HOA president now thrived in freedom, proving that sometimes the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes for everyone involved.